name is Tammy. I am the Director of Water Utility Regulation at the Public Utility Commission, or let me rephrase that, I was. Now I'm the Division of Utility Outreach Director. I've been in the water space for 24 years, and so I hope this information is helpful for you guys. What I'm here to talk to you about, I want to talk to you about fair market value. We also call it FMV, and how it's different in Texas than it is in other states. Other states that have this fair market value approach that I'm going to talk about have it to where it's an investor-owned utility or an IOU that's acquiring a public utility. Like it's an investor-owned utility that's actually going in and buying the city's infrastructure. And so that's how it is in most states. In Texas, it also allows this fair market value approach to be used for IOU purchase from an investor-owned utility to acquire another investor-owned utility. So that's how it's different in Texas. Next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly talk about this FMV, or fair market value, and then I'm also going to talk about this initial rates for investor-owned water or sewer utilities in Texas after an acquisition through what we call a sale, transfer, merger, or STM application. We call this initial rates after an STM. These top two approaches together have been a game changer in Texas, and we're starting to see applications for utilities from other areas in the country or even internationally wanting to come to Texas and try to talk to small cities, maybe some utility districts, to see about acquiring them and running them. Next slide. Oh, great. So, fair market value was enacted by the Texas legislature during the 86th legislative session. It was House Bill 3542. The fair market value approach applies to Class A and Class B utilities only. So a Class A utility is a water sewer utility with 10,000 or more water connections, and a Class B utility is one with 2,500 to 9,909 connections. So in Texas, the water and sewer utility industry is very fragmented, and there are small companies throughout the state in most situations that serve areas of Texas. And so this law allows for some of the larger, and I know you're going to say 2,500 doesn't seem large, but in some situations it actually is. So it allows only those Class A and Class B investor-owned utilities to use this approach. If a water utility provides both water and sewer service in Texas, the law says that the classification is based on the number of water connections only. So if you have a utility that provides service to 500 water but to 3,000 sewer companies, it's still not going to be a Class A or Class B. It's only those who provide water 2,500 or more can use this approach. So I know I told you earlier, but I use a lot of acronyms, but IOU means investor-owned utility. And when we say retail public utility in Texas, that means anyone that provides water service. It can be a city, it can be a district, a county, it can be anyone. And the other thing about fair market value is that you can't use it to buy one of your affiliates. Next slide. So fair market valuation. It requires the fair market value enabled regulation enabled IOUs to pay for what we call a fair market value for the purchase of water and sewer systems in Texas. Prior to this legislation, the only way water and sewer systems were valued was determined by the depreciated original cost of the facilities. So now that we have this approach in Texas, well, how do we determine this FMV, or fair market value? First, the Public Utility Commission must maintain a list of qualified utility valuation experts. These experts perform the appraisals of the selling utility. And I will tell you that there is a shortage nationally of these valuation experts. And so a lot of the times it's the same people across the board that are doing the same type of like in Pennsylvania, they'll also be doing it in Texas. We just don't have enough of these. So if you know anyone that can do this type of work, or you're interested, go out there and file with us and let us know. Second, the acquired utility and the selling utility must enter into an agreement. Obviously, they both have to enter an agreement to use this approach, and they file a notice with the PUC saying they want to use fair market value to determine the price. So once the PUC gets notice that an acquired utility and a selling utility want to use the fair market value approach, it triggers the selection of the valuation experts. The PUC's executive director or its designee selects the three different appraisers from the ones we have in-house or those that we know that are willing to do the work. They have to do this within 30 days after we receive notice that the entities want to use the fair market value approach. The acquiring utility contracts with the experts once they are selected by PUC, and then the three experts jointly have to hire an engineer to assess the tangible assets of the selling utility. So now that we have the three independent evaluation experts selected, a contract has to be entered in with the acquired utility for them to do the work, and another contract between the valuation experts and the engineer. So what happens next? Each expert performs an independent appraisal of the selling utility, and the statute specifies that the valuation experts does not consider certain things like the purchase price negotiated between the utilities, and the statute also specifies that the valuation expert does not consider the original funding source of the system. So I'll give you an example of a situation where we had Canyon Lake Water Utility. It was a water supply corporation, nonprofit entity. This is before fair market value came into fruition. And we had a company out of San Jose in California that came in and purchased them. When you do that, there's certain things that a public entity like a city or a water supply corporation can charge that an investor-owned utility can't charge by law. So what fair market value does in most situations, it kind of fixes that. It's like, how do we set rates for this entity going forward because they can't charge certain things. It also, in certain situations, there's bonds, there's grants, there's all kinds of other things that cities can do that a private entity can't, and so this kind of helps value that so that going forward, the investor-owned utility can know how to do it and set its rates. So back to the fair market value. Each expert that's selected by the PUC prepares an independent appraisal, and they must submit a completed report to the commission, the acquired utility and the selling utility within 120 days after they're selected. The fair market value is considered the value of the three, or the average of the three appraisals that are submitted, and the rate base set will be the rate base for the systems, the facilities acquired in the transaction and used in the future rate case. So what it does, it basically says, here's the amount, here's let's say that the fair market value average was $10,000. Well, then $10,000 will be the amount that you can claim in a future rate case to set your rates on. Next slide, please. When the appraisers do their work, there's three different approaches that they can use. They can use the cost approach, which must be based on the investment required to replace or reproduce future service capability, or the original cost of facilities as adjusted for depreciation. They can use an income approach, where the appraisal must be based on capitalization of earnings or cash flow, or the discounted cash flow method. It must also be supported by an explanation of how the capitalization rate was calculated, an explanation for the basis of the discounted rates used, and an explanation of the capital structure, cost equity, and the cost of debt used. Or they can use the market approach. A market approach appraisal must be based on the current connection count of the selling utility at the time of the appraisal. Use of a proxy group that includes companies that have made acquisitions that were not based on a fair market value methodology, or comparable sales that did not include the value of future capital projects in the selling price. So the other game changer, like I said, is this initial rates after the STM. This was House Bill 1484 of this last legislative session. It created a new provision in the Water Code 13.3011, and it's a new concept, and it's helping investor-owned utilities to acquire non-functioning or troubled utilities in Texas. We also call it, or you may hear something about filed rate doctrine. That's the other thing that we refer to as the initial rates. Before the law was enacted, when a retail public utility wanted to acquire another utility, they would have to acquire it and just charge the rates of this utility. They couldn't change their rates. So if I have a utility and I charge $20 a month, and there's a distressed utility over here that I may be interested in buying, but they're only charging $5 a month, when I acquired it, I would have to charge that same $5 a month. And so that was discouraging a lot of acquisitions in Texas. So some of our larger investor-owned utilities, when they want to buy a utility and start investing in their infrastructure, this is something that helped them because now they can implement their own rate structure immediately upon acquisition. Again, this has been a game changer, especially in situations where we have receiverships or temporary management situations in Texas. Even while I've been here, I got, and believe it or not, this happens in Texas all the time. I've been trying to work with my staff because we found a utility that somehow these customers have been without water for a month, and they're finally calling, and we were figuring this out, and it's because the utility owner passed away. So when this stuff happens, it's like, okay, we have to step in, appoint a receiver to take it over, a temporary manager, and then we work to try to find a buyer. So something like this really helps to incentivize a utility to kind of take them over. So if you want to use this initial rates method, what do? Well, the law allows, like I said, the acquiring utility to charge its own rates. If the regulatory authority, if it's an area inside the municipality, the city's the one that will make the decision of what rates, or is the one that you have to contact and say, hey, I want to buy this utility inside your city limits. The initial rates, if you want to use this method, must be requested at the time that they file their application to acquire the utility, and they obviously have to give notice to the customers. The law says that the regulated entity, which would be either a city or the state, the Public Utility Commission, cannot require a rate case at the time this comes in to establish the rates. This new law was in effect September 1, 2021. We do not have any rules in place yet at the PUC. We are working on that. But it must be, again, you must request if you want to use it through an STM application to be implemented. This is so new. We have 2 cases where people have asked to use this, but we haven't even had one go through the full process yet. So what does this all mean? Well, these 2 game changers incentivize our investor utilities to acquire non-functioning or distressed utilities. It allows for a method to determine the fair market value of a utility to be used in a future rate case, and it has created a lot of interest from entities outside of Texas, outside of the United States even, to enter the Texas water and sewer utility market. Most of these are coming in and telling us they really want to invest in some of our infrastructure that needs to be replaced or repaired, and this is really helping drive some of that. Any questions? Next slide. There's my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be glad to answer them.
Just real quick, I got one quick one.
Yes.
Is this mostly water and sewer, like you were sort of saying there on the last time? Or is there other utilities also under your umbrella?
And this particular discussion was about only the water and sewer.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thanks.
Sure. Any other questions? Okay, great.
Wonderful. Thank you.